Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Welcome, listeners. It's Stu here, your host of the Thrive Today podcasts. We're excited to launch our crowdfunding campaign to build the Thrive Today app. This app will bring together everything you love: Thrive podcasts, the daily Bible reading guides, teaching video series, and a growing library of meaningful resources designed to deepen your faith journey. To make this vision a reality, we need to raise $30,000. The build won't begin until the full amount is raised, and if we don't reach our target by January 31st, 2026, every donation will be refunded in full. So your support is absolutely vital to get this app off the ground. Simply visit our website, thrivetoday.tv, and click the app crowdfunding link at the top. You can then select your level of support. We'll keep you updated on progress as we seek to raise the funds needed by the end of January 2026. Now let's jump into this episode of Thrive Deeper with Pastor Matt. Well, hi Matt.
Hey Stu.
You're just back from a trip to Africa, in fact, to Kenya.
I am, yeah.
To visit the giraffes, was it?
Very complex place. I had a just interesting contrast between amazing sort of Garden of Eden level kind of exposure to wildlife and nature and amazing diversity of nature and God's creation, and then the complexity of human civilization.
Yeah.
I was quite struck by the contrast between those two things, the sort of chaos of a city like Nairobi and the beauty of that glimpse of God's original creation there. Anyway, which is very relevant to the book of Revelation, which seems to play on that kind of tension between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of this world. And because I was, studying fairly deeply, the book of Revelation through this. It was a good place to read the book of Revelation.
Wow. Okay.
In a very complesk, corrupt-filled city, like Nairobi.
Yeah. But you were visiting a church.
Partner church, that's right.
Who we're working with and helping there. So that was great visit by the sounds of things, and the team had a great time. Welcome, listeners. Great to have you with us for Thrive Deeper. We're going to be continuing, as Matt alluded to, the book of Revelation. And Matt, in the last episode, we kind of got up to the end of chapter 6. We'd heard about the horsemen of and we identified again, as we have throughout this so far, and will continue to, I'm sure. What we're reading here aren't just necessarily future events. They can be recurring events, and in the types of horsemen that we saw, conquest, war, famine, and death, in a sense, they're kind of default settings for the worldly system, for empire, really. Yeah. And it's not that this is only going to happen, that this is what has been happening and will continue to happen under man's kind of rule. We heard about the martyrs underneath the altar crying out, "How long?" to God, and being asked just to wait a little bit longer. And we see echoes of that in the Psalms, obviously. And this is not, I don't think anyway, demand for vengeance, more so a lament for justice. It's like, let's have justice be done. And then when we start to get into the opening of the 6th seal, we started to get into the apocalyptic imagery.
Yeah, it takes us right up to the end. So essentially what happens with the 7 seals, it's the unfurling. It shows the sovereignty of Christ over history, and it's interesting that as this is unfurled, and the horsemen are released, there's a sense of God bringing things to the surface, bringing things to a head. Now, that happens through history, but it also happens in an intense form at the end. Yes. So, the question, there's a sort of ongoing question around the things that we read about in Revelation. Is this something that happened, back in the first century? Because obviously it needed to mean something for them.
Yes.
Is it something that's happening? Is this about this age, or is it something that's going to happen in the future? And in a sense, it's all three of those things. And I think this is emphasized by the 7-fold repetition in Revelation of Christ as the one who is and who was and who is to come. Yeah. So there's a sense he is sovereign instantaneously over the present, the past, and the future, and he's holding that together. And so this is, the book of Revelation is written to comfort Christians in this turbulent age,
but also in that turbulent age. As you've said before, it's important that we understand what it meant before we think about what it means. And so understand what it meant to the Christians of the time when this was written. And of course, we know they were under extreme persecution at that point in time.
And the question at the end of chapter 6, Stu.
And who was able to stand.
Yeah, who was able to stand, right? So essentially as we move in, because all of these are catastrophic, cataclysmic events are happening, which takes us sort of right up to the, sort of the end of the age. The question is who is going to survive this? Essentially, that's what the question is. Who is going to stand? Well, that question is answered in chapter 7 because we are introduced to these 4 angels. They're standing at the 4 corners of the earth. Numbers throughout Revelation have symbolic importance. Anything that's fourfold is like the 4 living creatures or the 4 corners of the earth, 4 angels at the 4 corners of the earth, speaks about essentially the whole of the earth, covers all of creation, essentially.
Yeah.
The number 4. And they're told actually to just hold back for a moment.
Yes.
Okay, before...
Don't harm the earth.
That's right. Before in a sense, the death blow is struck. Just before the 7th seal is unfurled, which is going to lead to the 7 trumpet blasts, right?
Yes.
Like, Jericho, that causes the city
to
fall down, which then leads to the outpouring of God's judgment, which is symbolized by the 7 bowls.
Yep. Before
all that happens, there is this moment where they're told, just wait. Hang on a moment. A very important pause. This is the first of the interludes, Stu. These interludes are very important. Important things happen in these interludes that have some really important message for us. So here in verse 3, why don't you read that, Stu?
Yeah, don't harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we seal the slaves, other translations may say servants of our God, on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were to be sealed. 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And then it lists 12,000 from each of the tribes.
Yeah, that's right. So that's 12 times 12,000 is 144,000. So the number 12 is, a symbol of the people of God. So we had 24 elders, which is 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles, those two put together. So... so 12 is a number that refers to God's people. Now, the question here is, because what happens is that he hears the number, 144,000, and then he looks and he sees a great multitude that no one could number. Now, previously, when we had that occurrence in chapter 5, where he hears the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and then he looks and he sees a lamb, it tends to refer to the same thing. So a lot of commentators see these as the same thing. Now, this is where you get slightly different positions in this. And, and I don't want to get too drawn into sort of comparative interpretation here, Stu, because that can get confusing. I do, however, think it's important to recognize, though, because, a lot of commentary I hear in Revelation says this is what it means, as though it's really clear cut. I'm going to emphasize this just to try to recognize that there are different ways of interpreting this. And, I just try to come to this with some humility, and recognize, well, here are some different ways of interpreting this. So most of the commentaries that I was using, the top commentaries from the major sort of Christian publishers, most of those were saying this is the more or less the same group, but cast in 2 different ways.
Okay.
It's basically referring to God's people. Some people think that this is referring to like Jew and Gentile. One is the Jews and the next is the Gentiles. And then there's another interpretation that just sees this actually as the Jewish people. 2 ways of casting the Jewish people.
Well, they see the 12 tribes as the Jewish people, and then the multitude as the Jewish people as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
both
right.
Groups.
Yeah. Some people see them.
So even though the scripture actually says from every nation, tribe, people, and language, which no one could number, they still feel that could still infer.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'm trying to hold this.
Yes, sure.
Trying to hold this because this is they would say this is the scattered, the diaspora,
Yeah.
I think we can, for the sake of application, and again, I think we need to remember this was written to a church that was Jew and Gentile, a mixture of Jew and Gentile.
Yes.
And I think we want to read everything here as having application to everyone, whether it's Jew or Gentile. So rather than, this has got nothing to do with you, this is about just the Jewish people in the final 7 years of history, which there is an interpretation of Revelation that sees a lot of these things now that are going to unfold here as occurring within what they refer to as the 70th week of Daniel, because Daniel predicted 69 weeks leading up to Christ, and then the prophetic clock stops and you get the church age, and then God's dealings with Israel pick up again in the last 7 years. That's a view known as dispensationalism, and there's different forms of that view. Now, look, Stu, that may be correct, but I think again we can say while some of these things may indeed happen at a period at the end of history, there's a sense in which this applies.
Is happening.
Is happening. Has happened, is happening, and will happen. Yeah. So I think we can say this is, referring to the fact that, the people of God are sealed and protected. Now, they're not sealed and protected from hardship per se, Stu. They're sealed and protected from the wrath and the judgment of God. See what I'm saying? So this is, for example, Psalm 91 says, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And it describes lots of judgments, the arrow that flies by day and the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, and says none of these will come near you. Now, it's not saying nothing bad will happen. What that psalm is saying is that you will not suffer the judgment. God is not judging you because you are under the grace of God. You're under the shadow of the grace of God. And because of that, you will tread upon the lion and the serpent. So essentially, that's the message of Psalm 91 is the same message as we have here. So because this people of God is sealed, they're under the shelter of the Most High. So they're spared what is essentially the outpouring of God's judgment on the earth. That's what they're spared from. Doesn't necessarily, or you could say they're spared through that even, because there, some people think that the church is taken out of this altogether. This isn't the end. I hope I'm not being confusing here.
No.
But there's an approach, the futurist view that sees this as the last 7 years. There is one version of that view that sees the saints as being raptured, and
prior to this happening,
taken out, while these things unfold.
The tribulation happens.
Again, I know that's confusing, and there are different forms of this view, but the big picture here is the Psalm 91 picture, right? These things are going to be poured out in the earth, but God's church is going to be spared, let me put it this way, through this. They're going to, in whatever way that means. So it says in verse 13, then one of the elders addressed me saying, "Who are these clothed in white robes, and where have they come from?" I said, "Sir, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Now, the great tribulation could just be that period at the end of history. I think that's got something going for it. That's sort of, the great with a capital G, tribulation.
Yes.
Right at the end. A lot of commentators say that also could refer to what actually, when John's writing to these people, there's a sense that they sensed that they were going through a tribulation, and it's speaking to them, saying pretty much this whole age is a kind of great tribulation. And of course, we can say, Stuart, can be both of those things, right? So it's not necessarily exclusively one of those things. So
at the end of chapter 7, there's kind of a bit of a
eschatological
reversal where we move away from being the ones that are chosen and under God's care, in a sense, being central. And now shifts to the focus. And now the seventh seal can open, right? So that's the interlude. Now the final seal is opened. Yeah. And there's this dramatic silence, Stu. I mean, it says there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And is this just a dramatic pause? Maybe, a moment of awe, or perhaps this is heaven listening to the prayers of the saints. Coming from under the altar,
Yeah, maybe, because that's alluded, this is what happens here. Because basically what happens is that, we see 7 angels with these 7 trumpets.
Another angel with a golden censer.
Yeah, this golden censer. Now this is referring to, in the temple, they had this altar of incense. And the altar of incense symbolize the prayers of God's people going up before God. So the incense would burn before the curtain. Yes. And it's interesting what happens here is that the bowl of incense had coals in it, and that would burn the incense. So what happens here is that it pictures the smoke of the prayers going up. And then what happens is the angel comes, it says, verse 5, the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it down to earth. Yeah. So essentially the prayers go up, and the answer is essentially cast upon the earth. So this is the prayers of the saints that we saw in chapter 6.
Yes.
The martyrs under the altar that are saying, how long
before justice is done?
Before justice is done in the earth. Here's the answer, right?
And again, important to recognize this is coming because God had given authority to man. This had to come from the prayers of the saints.
That's right.
That's the authority, in a sense, for this to then happen.
Yeah, that's right. So their prayers go up and the judgment comes down. That's what we're seeing here. So this is the answer to the prayers that were prayed in chapter 6.
Yeah.
And so this is, then you get the 7 trumpets. Now this is, the 7 trumpets is very much judgment sort of language here, Stu. So, the first trumpet, you get, hail, fire mixed with blood. Second trumpet, something like a great mountain burning with fire is thrown into the sea.
So these are all warnings, though. They're not the final kind of... Yeah. These are still warnings giving opportunity for people to turn, potentially.
Yeah, that's right.
They're meant to awaken rather than to annihilate people. They're,
And we know that because it keeps saying a third of. So this is like a taster. This is not complete and final
So it's a bit like Moses going to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Plague.
It's exactly like that.
Yeah.
So a lot of this evokes that Exodus context.
Yeah.
So the hail and the fire, mixed with blood, the great mountain burning with fire being thrown into the sea. Looks like some volcano or something.
Comet or who knows
whatever. What. Yeah, who knows. The third trumpet, a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch.
Yep.
Fell in a third of the rivers. The name of the star is Wormwood. As I'm reading this, Stu, I mean, one of the temptations here is to
join dots.
Well, it's to try to join dots, and it's not. I mean, I don't think that's a problem, because I think particularly in our age, it's actually easier to imagine how these things could even be somewhat literally fulfilled. I mean, this is where I think in our age there is a lot of this drawing dotted lines. Well, this could refer to this. If you're moving towards a literal interpretation. I mean, a lot of commentators tend to stick in the symbolic kind of, these are symbols of things to come.
Yes.
But there are those that remind us that, well, some of these things could happen literally too.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, I mean, we shouldn't dismiss that.
No.
And it's certainly easier now in our day to imagine how some of these things could potentially be fulfilled in a slightly more literal way. But who knows? Anyway, the point is it's bad. But the reason why I mentioned that when I came to the word wormwood, because I don't know if you remember back in the 80s when the Chernobyl disaster happened and everyone was quite alarmed. And even, Reagan referred to the fact that, of course, wormwood, Chernobyl is the word for wormwood.
Yeah.
And so, it's like, is this a sort of a nuclear thing happening here? Or, I mean.
But Chernobyl would have been named after the word wormwood was in the Bible. So who followed who here?
It could be. That's right. It could be. So anyway.
I think it's important to say here before we move on to the last few trumpets, and again, just to reiterate, and I know you said this last time, let's not forget that God is still completely in control of all of this.
Absolutely.
This isn't happening outside of God's control. This is part of his bringing the walls down, Jericho, so that the new thing can be built.
That's right. That's what's happening here. So that, this is the walls of Jericho coming down. The fourth angel blows his trumpet. Third of the sun struck, third of the moon, third of the stars. The darkness again, like the plague of darkness. This evokes the Exodus. So essentially, what happens under Moses to Egypt, because they're holding God's people captive, is essentially repeated here in a universal sense.
Yes.
So, the plagues on Egypt become the sort of foretaste in a sense. As I said, prophecy and these symbols, these things are seen as cyclical events. They happened, they are happening and will happen because it's cyclical in nature in a sense.
Yeah. Although there will come a point. We're not saying it's constantly cyclical. There is a point of end, which we haven't.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there is,
and I think this is pointing to that consummation.
Yeah.
Even if there's a sense that it's saying to that audience, some of these things that we've read so far, they're feeling like some of these things have happened.
Yes.
Well, yes, but God is completely in control, as you say. This is part of the point.
Yeah.
And it's got a goal, and we'll read more about that as we go. So the fifth angel blows his trumpet. And now a star falls from heaven to earth, and clearly stars in the Old Testament refer to angels, or can be symbols of angels. There's a particular angel here is given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. So there's a sense here in which, well, literally all hell kind of breaks loose. I mean, not, there's this bottomless pit where I guess demonic beings are in some sense held, incarcerated in some sense. Essentially, the doors are open and they're let out to do their worst. Now, this is allowed by God, is allowing this to happen. This is all about let's bring this stuff to the surface. And so they are released.
And again, these could be locusts, but they could be also pointing.
They're described as locusts, right?
Symbolic of spiritual torment, perhaps psychological or societal breakdown. Revelation does tend to, as I've read this again, tend to externalize inner realities. Brokenness inside gets externalized into this is what that looks like. So we don't know. Again, it could be locusts. It says locusts.
And look, for people in this region, and
yes, of course.
I mean, we probably would not have, experienced a plague of locusts, but, they small, relatively seemingly harmless creatures, but they go out into the fields and they strip everything bare, right?
It's amazing, isn't it?
They lay waste, absolutely lay waste to everything. And it's just little bites. I mean, this is the thing, tiny little bites and I think it's a powerful imagery of this demonic reality that this is essentially these demonic creatures are being released out into the earth to lay waste everything. And notice, because there are still some people that would still say there's a sense in which this is kind of happening. But I think, this is definitely is casting forward to a sort of final, a kind of final.
Yeah, I agree.
Sort of release of evil and a taking away of restraint. I mean, Paul talks in Thessalonians about a restraint being taken away and the man of lawlessness, appearing. So this certainly looks like a restraint, Stu, is being taken out of the way.
Yeah,
and,
totally.
And all hell breaking loose, quite literally. Not that they're coming from hell, it's just they're coming from the bottomless pit. Now, we should remember too that in sort of ancient Near Eastern cosmology, the bottomless pit refers to the watery depths, so the chaos, the depths of chaos. So this is the forces of chaos, this demonic reality being released in the earth.
So then it says, then out of the smoke, locusts came to the earth, and a power was given to them like the power that scorpions have on the earth.
Yeah, notice it says, that they were given the key. They were given this power. They were given. Yeah. This is all God is allowing them to do this.
And this is to awaken.
Yeah.
Giving people the opportunity, because it says they were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or any tree, but only people who do not have God's seal on their foreheads.
Yeah.
They were not permitted to kill them, but were to torment them for 5 months. Their torment is like the torment caused by a scorpion when it strikes a man.
Yeah. And then it gives these horrific description of these locusts. Again, that very much seems like these are demonic. These some kind of this is demonic sort of symbolism going on here. So they're allowed for 5 months, this kind of limited period to do this. It's interesting. It says here they have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, or in Greek, he's called Apollyon. There's a proverb that talks about locusts having no king. These locusts, though, have a king. These are not literal locusts. These are locusts. These are demonic creatures under the control of this sort of arch demon called Apollyon. Is this the devil or another demon? There's a bit of debate over that. Is it a play on Apollo as well? Because remember, we're in Greek. We're in the Greco-Roman Empire here.
Yeah,
could be a sort of a bit of a play on that as well, because he's Apollo was like the son of God. So that there's a lot of mimicry as we read on here. There's a lot of demonic, at least demonic beings or demonic inspired people who are mimicking, in a sense, the claims of Christ. So, Apollyon as the sort of false, Apollo as the false son of God, perhaps there's an allusion to that.
Wow.
So the sixth angel blows the trumpet, and there's a voice from the altar.
It says, release the 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates. So the 4 angels who were prepared for the hour, day, month, and year were released to kill a third of the human race.
Yeah, so this is the third throughout here. So this is, again, it's not final judgment, but something is released here. Now, if you were hearing this in its original context, you would think the River Euphrates evokes a couple of things.
Yes.
So probably the most immediate impact on hearers is beyond the River Euphrates means the Parthians. So again, we have to imagine that the Parthians were for the Roman Empire what, perhaps Russia was to Europe during the Cold War or something.
Yes.
This enormous foe that if they break in, it's really, really going to be bad, right? So it sort of evokes that. I mean, it's also worth mentioning that the Euphrates was according to the land that was given to Abraham, and the land was extended to this extent under Solomon, went right to the river Euphrates. So this is sort of the border of the promised land, as it were. So it's
and a primary water supply for
that.
Most of the nations in that region as well.
Yeah.
So then he goes on.
This is this kind of caving in. So it's, this is not just the Parthians. This is something way worse. It's like something that has been held back is now going to be allowed to come and flood.
Yeah. So the number of mounted troops was 200 million. I heard their number. This is how I saw the horses in my vision. The horsemen had breastplates that were fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulphur yellow. The heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and from their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulphur. A third of the human race was killed by these three plagues, by the fire, the smoke, and the sulphur that came from their mouths. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails, because their tails, like snakes, have heads, and they inflict injury with them.
Yeah, so notice we went from locusts, and then there's another sort of picture of this is clearly demonic creatures, the way that they're described, but yes, there's an escalation here, right? So that's bad. The fifth seal, it's kind of bad. What gets released is pretty bad.
Yes. But
when the sixth seal gets released, this is even worse.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yeah.
This is like, no, this is actually your worst fears realized.
Yep.
This is not designed to, this is not just about scary. This is the warning, because the big concern of the writer of Revelation, and Richard Borkham makes this point in his book, The Theology of the Book of Revelation. It's an excellent book, actually. I'm halfway through it. But he makes this point that one of the core concerns, or pretty much the core concern of the book of Revelation, is to ensure that the church does not capitulate to the world system.
Yeah.
That it stays faithful to the mission, and that mission can be misconstrued in all sorts of ways. So that's another way of capitulating, is not just doing the wrong thing, but trying to do the right thing in the wrong way. So it's not capitulating to the world system or the world's ways, right?
Yep.
Don't get drawn into that, right?
Yes.
So that's a key. And we see that in the letters, don't we? That open, the big concern there is don't get drawn in to the things of this world, because this is what's going to happen to this world, right? If you throw in your lot with the world, this is where that's going to go, right? So, and of course, they're suffering from the world, but essentially what God is saying to them, to us, and to those in the future is what they are doing to is nothing compared to what comes upon those who cause these little ones to stumble.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, Jesus talks about, woe to those who, cause my people to stumble. Yeah. And this is what's happening here. This is a warning. So,
and of course, as a warning, the rest of the people who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands to stop worshipping demons and idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood, which are not able to see, hear, or walk, which of course is from Psalm 115, is it?
Yeah.
And they did not repent of their murders, their sorceries, their sexual immorality, or their theft.
So this is interesting. It's almost as though
God's hardening their hearts.
Yeah,
perhaps.
Exactly.
This
is the Exodus.
Yeah,
this is the Exodus theme here. So even though Pharaoh saw all of these things happening, his heart was hardened. Now, this didn't mean that God caused him to do all of these things. It's the principle of, again, it's Matthew chapter 13, where Jesus says, to those who have, and he talks about having ears to hear and eyes to see, which is a willing heart.
Yeah.
To those who have, they will be given even more. Openness and willingness of heart. But to those who do not have, even what they have will be taken away from them. Yeah. So this is kind of what's happening here. So all of these things that happen, they just, I talked about bringing things to the surface.
Yes.
Essentially what happened in the Exodus is Pharaoh's hardness of heart was brought to the surface, was made evident. This is what's happening here.
Yes.
All of this is being made evident. I've just finished reading, Stu, C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce.
Okay.
And, it's interesting. It's basically narrates a dream. It's a bit of a spoiler because you don't find out at the end that it's a dream. I think he casts it as a dream to avoid any
parallels being drawn.
Well, any sense that he's, bringing some kind of extra revelation. But it's, people have this opportunity there. They're sort of taken to heaven, but they won't accept it. They refuse to accept it. And it's a bit of a thought experiment on C.S. Lewis's part that is kind of aligns with this. It's like people's refusal to accept even heaven. You know what I mean? So essentially all the characters, they essentially condemn themselves. It's not just God is essentially giving everyone what they want in the end.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting little thought experiment there.
All right, let's move into chapter 10. Some interesting things happening here and parallels back to Old Testament, in terms of Ezekiel, the mighty angel and the small scroll. Do you want me to read a bit of this?
Maybe let's just summarize this. So
okay,
let's talk about a mighty angel, Stu, because he's got a scroll in his hand, but he's got 1 foot in the sea and 1 foot on the land.
Yeah.
Possibly, this is God's power. Again, this is another expression of God's power and sovereignty.
Yeah.
This is an angel. This is not even God himself. This is an angel representing. Some people wonder whether is this Jesus but I think when it says it's an angel, it's an angel, but representing God's authority and sovereignty. Now over, 1 foot in the sea, so authority over the sea and over the land. It's going to be important because in chapter 13, we're going to have 2 beasts, one out of the sea and one out of the earth.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is preparing us for the fact God's saying, right, there's going to be these two, these forces of evil that's going to come out of the sea and out of the land, but I am absolutely sovereign over this.
Yeah.
So this is preparing us for that. And actually...
And he's holding a little scroll.
Yeah, he's holding...
This giant angel is holding
a little scroll. And this is where I think the sovereignty is important because we get to participate in the sovereignty as well. So he basically says there's going to be no more delay. Okay, because remember, he said to the souls under the altar who were praying, wait a little while.
There was half an hour silence. Wait.
Now there's going to be no more delay as we come to, because we've had 6 trumpets.
Yes.
And this again is an interlude, I should have said, Stu. There's always these interludes before you get to the 7th. We have this interlude, right? There's no more delay. But it's interesting how this happens. Now remember the last one, it was the interlude essentially stops so that the prayers of the saints go up.
Yes.
And the trumpets are depicted as the answer to those prayers. So the prayers go up like incense, and then the incense bowl is poured out on the earth. So as the prayers go up, the judgment comes down. Well, here, there's a similar sort of idea because God says to John, take this scroll and eat it. Now, this reminds us, of course, of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel, end of chapter 2 and beginning of chapter 3, is given a scroll that is a scroll of judgment and woe, and he eats it, and it tastes as sweet as honey in his mouth. Now, we're told this tastes, as John eats it, it tastes as sweet as honey in his mouth. But when he swallows it, he says it turned his stomach bitter. So very similar idea, just the other way around to Ezekiel. It's sweet because it's the truth, right? It's the word of God, right? This is revelation. But this is not the good news, right?
This is bitter to proclaim.
This is the bad news. This is the bad news that makes the good news good, right?
Yes.
So he eats this. This is not something... we're not gloating over this. John's not encouraged to gloat over this. He's, he eats this scroll and it sits bitterly in his
judgment,
stomach, right? This is judgment. It's a terrible thing. As Ezekiel says, God does not delight in the destruction of the wicked. So, this is John. He eats this. Now, this is where, again, this is the role of God's people. The first interlude we had was emphasizing the role of prayer. So the prayers go up, the judgment comes down. John is told here, you must again prophesy about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. So this is this prophetic role, again, that he has. So notice God's people aren't pushed out of the process. Whether this is referring to, and I think it's both, it's saying something about all of God's people or someone particular. Can easily be both of those things. We're not pushed. It's not God's not just doing things while we just kind of look on. No, there's a part that we have to play.
Yes.
To pray and to prophesy, as in the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to declare
the day of the Lord.
Yeah, to declare the day of the Lord. And so this is
because again, God gave mankind responsibility.
That's
for
right.
the earth.
Yeah. So this is declaring again here both the good news and the bad news, and the two kind of go
Now,
together.
we did skip over one bit that I think we don't need to dig into it, but it's important to mention that when the angel stood, he cried out with a loud voice like a roaring lion. When he cried out, the seven thunders spoke with their voices. And when the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write. But then I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up what the seven thunders said and do not write it down. So there's clearly something we're not to know at this point in time.
Yeah, that's a good summary of that because, I said in the last episode, Stu, that, don't get too caught up in the details. I have been so much in the details. I mean, I think what I was really, because you do need to understand the details to understand the big picture. And there is a lot of important detail here. So please don't ignore the details. Don't misconstrue what I said. I think, I was referring to a couple of things, not always trying to draw dotted lines and be speculative about, does this refer to a nuclear explosion
or this person
or this person or that person? We're just got to be careful with that. I mean, it's not that we can't, shouldn't try to imagine that these things could happen. But I mean, the other thing then is just losing the big picture. And again, I found it really useful because I've waded through all these details. But again, reading Richard Baucham's book, The Theology of Revelation, which is a beautiful big picture. Here's the message. That was very useful to read that.
That's great.
It's just,
I'll recommend that and put a link to it.
It drew me back up to the big picture.
Great.
It's a scholarly book, but I mean, fascinating if you want to do a deep dive into the message, not so much the details, but the message of Revelation.
So did he speak anything to the thunder and why?
No,
that
I didn't get into those. But there was a bit of, I've heard a bit of debate as to why John is told not to
write that down.
Yeah, not to write that down. But I think you're on the right track. That as much as God is revealing, things are being veiled throughout this book as well. Even if it's just the language and how cryptic some of this is.
Yeah. So then we move into chapter 11, and we'll probably finish at chapter 11, I think, Matt, today. We have the appearance of the two witnesses, but first of all, John is given a measuring rod and told to go measuring reed and told to go and measure God's sanctuary and the altar and count those who worship there. Yeah.
So what's happening here? Is he measuring a literal temple?
Yep.
Some people think that's it. There's those who interpret this as literal events in the future, and that may well be the case. But remember, even if it is a literal temple, the temple actually itself is a symbol of something.
Yeah.
So even if there is a literal temple, itself is pointing to something.
Which the original temple was. The very first temple.
Exactly.
The tabernacle in the desert.
Which is the people of God. Exactly. So he's told to not measure the court outside the temple, leave that, for it's given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. Now, this is where we get there's this repeated 42 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 years. It's all the same period. It's theologically significant, Stu, because it's half of 7. So it's whether or not at some point it's going to be literally
42 months,
3.5 year period. The point is, there's a strong symbolism to this because it's cut short.
Yes.
It's a very strong sense of this time being cut short. It's not going to be forever. And if you're an original reader, and by this stage, I don't think they could have, particularly for the Jewish readers, they're very conscious of the fact that the temple has been destroyed and it's being trampled. So hang on, what's happening with that?
What's he measuring here?
Yeah. So it's being trampled. At the same time, there's very strong early church theology is that the church is the temple of God. They saw themselves as the fulfillment of the temple of God. That's very explicit in the writings of Paul. So I think you need to sort of inhabit that idea as well. If you're an early reader, you're thinking we are the temple of God and we're being trampled. So I think you have to include that idea. Totally. But the point is, it's not going to be forever. This is the comfort. This is where we're taking notice of what this originally meant for the people back then. So that this is cut short. It's not a 7, it's a 3.5. Again, this is part of what's comforting. This is not going to last forever, right? But the faithfulness of God will endure. This won't endure, but the faithfulness of God will. And that's a big part of what's happening in the book of Revelation. So let's talk about the two witnesses here. Verse 4 says, these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of all the earth. This, again, for Jewish readers, this is not just cryptic. This is referring to Zechariah. And Zechariah refers to 2 olive trees. They basically stand for the governor and the high priest at the time in the context of Zechariah. Right. But when they're described here, it looks very much, because it says in verse 6, they have the power to shut the sky so that no rain falls, and they have the power to turn the waters into blood. Now, the two core Old Testament prophets for a Jewish person is Moses and Elijah. So it's hard to ignore the fact that this is exactly what they did.
Yes.
So this is sort of Moses and Elijah. This is, again, on the one hand, it's Zerubbabel, the governor, and Joshua, the high priest, in the context of post-exilic community in Zechariah's time. But then it becomes Moses and Elijah. Mm. Now, the fact is, actually, all through Scripture, there are two witnesses. In fact, in proceedings, you couldn't accept a verdict,
two witnesses,
or an accusation as true unless there were, two or three witnesses. So the witnesses, the whole theme of witness is such a big one, Stu, in the book of Revelation. Yeah. Because essentially the message is don't stop bearing witness, right? Because it's actually that, they overcome, that we're going to hear this, they overcame by their witness and by the blood of the Lamb, right? Yeah. By the word of their testimony. Mm. This is how the saints, God's people, overcome and are victorious. Yes. It goes on to say that they overcame the evil one by the word of their testimony and the blood of the Lamb, right? So it's absolutely crucial that even though there's all this pressure, the point is don't stop bearing witness, right? Don't let go of your testimony, right? Don't get drawn into irrelevant battles. I'm going to keep kind of mentioning this because again, you can try to achieve the right thing in the wrong way. So no, do it in the right way. We're bearing witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? We're on mission. So stick to the mission. Stu, as opposed to try to just patch up the world system and Christianize the world system. No, that's not. We're in the midst of it. We can have positive influence, but our primary, and we should have positive influence.
Totally.
But our primary mission is to bear witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Which means to follow Jesus Christ's model when he was on earth.
That's right.
And certainly he witnessed to the world, but he did not conform to the world.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we have these two witnesses. Probably, the discussion around this is, again, could this be literally two witnesses at the end of the age? Look, possibly a lot of commentators, though, see this again as referring to the witness of the church. Again, it's the right kind of witness. It's also in the context of the fact that John is told to prophesy, putting that in the light of the first interlude, which was really about the role of God's people. Yeah. You get a sense that this is also the role of God's people. But what happens is actually because of their testimony, and there's a warning about this in the letters to the 7 churches. Yes. Jesus says to them, you haven't been faithful to the point of death yet. In other words, you may well be called to bear witness even to the point of death. And
the word witness means in Greek is martyria, I think it is.
Well, martyr is the word witness. It's the other way around. Right. They gave their lives for this, which is the ultimate witness. Yes. To the truth.
And when we see that word, though, it's always, as far as I can tell, tethered to the character of Christ. Humble, truth-bearing, willing to die for, in a sense. Yeah. The cause. It's never about rising up in power and fighting the world with the world's weapons. Yeah. That's not what we're doing here.
That's right. So basically, what we read here essentially follows Christ's model, because what happens is their bodies are cast. Basically, they're not put in a tomb. Their body is left exposed. Now, remember, Jesus' body was exposed on the cross, and it was to shame them, right? So you have people, and it's again 3.5 days. It's not the final word. It's for a time, for 3.5 days. There's that number again. They're going to gaze at their dead bodies, and there's a sense of that they're going to rejoice and make merry. In fact, they're going to gloat, right? In the same ways people gloated over Christ and mocked him when he was on the cross. But after 3.5 days, all of this is very familiar, Stu, from what happened to Christ. But after 3.5 days, the breath of God entered them and they stood on their feet, right? Resurrection, following the pattern of Christ. Yeah. The language that is used there, though, is the language from Ezekiel chapter 37.
The breath.
The valley of the dry bones, the breath enters them. Okay, so this is God's people essentially going through what Jesus went through, pointing to, there's, again, I pause there because there's some debate exactly what this is referring to, but you get this death, resurrection, ascension kind of model. Now that happens here because after they stand to their feet, there's a loud voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud and their enemies watched them. And then
there was a violent earthquake.
And then you get the seventh, that's right. And then you get the seventh trumpet, right? So Again, is this what some theologians refer to as the rapture? Listeners probably have heard that word. Some people believe the rapture happens before the 7-year period.
Yes.
Some people believe it happens in the middle after 3.5 years. We can see some reasons why that may be here. And some people think it happens right at the end. And again, that they might appeal to this. So, look, again, I don't want to muddy the waters and confuse people. But the point is, and let's again get the big point here, is that you will go through what Jesus went through, right?
Yes.
Jesus said, if anyone wants to be my disciple, he must deny himself, to take up his cross and follow me. Because what he says again and again, what happened to me is going to happen to you, right? But remember, what happened to Jesus was death wasn't the last word, right? It was he was resurrected and he ascended into heaven. So this is essentially, this is the promise and the comfort in this. And then you get the blowing of the seventh trumpet. And
just before that, important to say, 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. The survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe has passed. Take note, the third woe is coming quickly.
You keep reading out verses that I don't want to try and skip over it because it's a very interesting statement. But again, there's so much debate over what does this mean? So does this mean that those who are left actually all become Christians?
Yes. We don't know.
Yeah,
that's certainly what it would. You could interpret it that way.
Or is it despite themselves? Right.
Yes.
So there's a few different approaches to this.
And I think perhaps
is it just an acknowledgement of God's power? You know,
and I think some of this maybe is connected back to the thunder that we don't know what was said, and we only see part of the picture.
Yeah.
But again, it's more about the fact that we, as you've said just before, we need to expect to suffer the challenges of Christ and be willing to suffer the challenges of Christ, but we need to be faithful through that.
Yeah, that's right.
And work our way through whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And then we get the seventh trumpet.
Yeah, well, and it says here, the kingdom of the world, when the seventh trumpet blows, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Now, notice how this is put, Stu. This is not us going somewhere else.
No, that's right.
The earth was given to humankind. This is our home, and this is going to be purged and renewed. That's what happens. That's where we see it goes. It's not the final, even though we go to heaven. I mean, when we die, and this talks about the saints going up to heaven, that's not the final word. The final word in Revelation 21 is the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. Right?
Yes.
And it's God dwelling with people. And it's essentially the joining or the reunion of heaven and earth. Let me put it that way. So the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ. So there's almost a sense that the world system is like an occupying force, in a sense, over God's creation. Yeah. And this is destroyed.
And God's breaking in amid the chaos taking control.
That's right. And so there's this song of thanksgiving that refers in verse 18 to Psalm 2, very prophetic Psalm 2, about the nations raging and, the people's plot in vain against your anointed one. Oh, it's so relevant. So there's so much. Stu, I've seen and listened to lecture series that go for 100 hours on some of this stuff. You can spend so much time because so much of this refers back to the whole of the rest of the Bible. This is why this is so incredibly rich. So the connection with Psalm 2 here is so interesting because basically what Psalm 2 is saying, the nations rage and the people's plot in vain, but the one enthroned in heaven laughs at them. This is absolutely puny because I've enthroned my anointed one on my holy hill and he will break you with it's just like Revelation is like the unfolding of Psalm 2.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, the celebration here cast in the words of Psalm 2 is just a beautiful, brilliant moment here. So we have this reference finally to God's temple in heaven was open and the Ark of the Covenant was seen within his temple. There were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, earthquake and heavy hail. This is going to lead in a moment after there's some really weird things that are going to happen. We're going to cover this in the next episode. But why the reference to the Ark of the Covenant? Now, what does the Ark of the Covenant represent? It's the Ark of the Covenant. So it represents God's plan, God's purpose. And all of Revelation is about God's purposes being fulfilled, right? So what God promised, and the Ark of the Covenant was the representation of God's purpose and God's promise for the world. So the reference here is this sense that all of this is coming to fruition, that even though it seems so unlikely, and I think this is a great place to finish, Stu, even though we're in the midst of things that it just seems so unlikely that this doesn't look like fulfillment, this doesn't look like God's faithfulness. Yeah, but hang on, because we're not finished yet. When you're in the middle of something, of course it looks like chaos. Of course it looks terrible. We live in the midst of a world that is in chaos, and we can ask these questions and wonder why and say with the souls under the altar, how long, O Lord? But we need to know in the midst of that God is going to show himself faithful. You might not see it yet. In our lifetime, we may not see it, but God will show himself faithful in the end. And the imperative for us is to put our faith in his faithfulness.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all our resources and much more at our website thrivetoday.tv. We really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading as we go through the Bible with Thrive. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper and thrive.